Hi there. I'm Scott, and this is Great Scott Knitting, a podcast. Welcome to episode 11. If you're a returning viewer, hey, thanks for sticking with me and continuing to watch. And for those of you who are new to this channel, thank you for checking it out. I hope you enjoy it. Today is November 14th of 2020. And here in Wichita, Kansas, it will be 72 degrees and windy, but hey, it's Kansas, so when is it not windy? Boy, it has been a crazy couple of weeks out there. COVID is kicking us in the ass. The election season is going into overtime, and it's just going to be interesting to see how everything turns out. And we still have about a month and a half to go in 2020, and with all hopes that 2021 will be markedly different. Well, with that, let's get into at least my favorite pastime, which is knitting. And let's talk about that part of my life and that part that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So we'll start off with some finished objects. Okay, so basically I've had several long-term um, projects on the needles that I'm continuing to work on. But I have also been crazy with knitting a bunch of cowls of late. Um, the weather's starting to turn cold, and I've been wanting to play a little bit with some color work, and I came across this pattern called Nicoletta, and it's by Yuki Hokari, and it is a free pattern on Ravelry, and it is a really, really simple cowl that allows you to do some color work. This is just two colors, worsted weight yarn, that is knit. Basically, one row is knit, and then the other one is seed stitched. And when you knit the main color and then seed stitch this other color, you get this pattern that emerges when you alternate rows doing that. It is so simple, but it just turns out so nicely. This color pattern, it kind of looks like a webbing that occurs. I'm really fascinated with it. So I knit this up a couple of times. I followed the pattern exactly and got this long narrow cowl, which is really great because, well, it can be great because this one you can easily double to wear it like this. Now, for me, that's a little bit tight, but for some people, it'd probably be really, it'd be nice to have it that snug around the neck. I did a separate one that is smaller for just, instead of doubling it, you can just wear it like this. The first one was done using Loops and Threads Impeccable Solids from Michaels. It's their house yarn, in clear blue, and I think it's called butterscotch, but I don't know. It's this just a yellow color. 100% acrylic. And then this other one I did in Karen's Simply Soft, and the green color is Pagoda, and the white underneath is actually called off-white tweed in color. So it has some different color flecks throughout it. I don't know if you can notice some of that going on, that you can see sort of different tweedy color flecks in this. Again, another 100% acrylic, but they're really nice. They wash up nicely. They're relatively soft. So yeah, I've been working on those. And then I have a couple of projects that I have to get going for holiday gifting in mid-December. So have about 3 or 4 things that I needed to do. And there are specific colorways that have been requested for these by my husband. So one of them is actually these that I'm getting ready to do are all for my the office staff at my nephew's school, and my husband is very very particular about giving gifts to these folks, and I'm the one that creates them. So I'm doing a cowl for one of them, which this is called the let me see, it's the Cobbled Cowl by Annie Schweier, or maybe Schwier, but it is a real simple, again, another really simple pattern. I believe this one has slip stitches in it. Really simple pattern. The yarn that I used is Knit Picks Swish Worsted, and it was a bear yarn that I dyed myself in a neon purple food coloring in a gradient. So I dyed it as a cake. And so here's the outside of the cake and here's the inside of the cake. So it made this really lovely gradient cowl. It's nice and it's extremely soft because Knit Picks Swish Worsted is, I believe, 100% merino wool. It's just, I don't know, it's lovely. And I love the pattern that it came up with because it became very speckled as well as having this nice gradient. So I'm really, really pleased with this. I think that'll make a lovely gift for one of the ladies in the school office. And then I did another cowl out of some yarn that I dyed for some experimentation. And because of the color, this is really blowing out quite a bit. Maybe I can get it up here where you can sort of see it. There we go. So this is a set of mini skeins that I did for some dyeing tutorials that I am eventually going to get up online. And this is basically going from a solid to a hand-painted yarn to a speckled yarn to a dip-dyed gradient type yarn. And I didn't use any particular pattern on this. It's basically sort of a stitch sampler because I wanted to see how these stitched up in different types of stitches. So it started with your basic stockinette, and then I went to move this in the right direction. Then I went to seed stitch, and then I went to reverse stockinette, and then finally to garter stitch. Where's the garter stitch section? Yeah, there it is. There's that garter stitch section right in here. And I did it angularly so that it sort of spirals, the different stitch patterns spiral around the cowl. So you really don't necessarily notice a lot of the stitch pattern, but you can, when you look at it in detail, you can see how it plays differently and the color plays out differently with different stitch patterns. I really liked it. What I did was I started off with just knitting the one color itself. Then I went into alternating rows between the two skeins and then shifted to just the one skein on its own, two at a time, or another back and forth between the two skeins, then the skein itself, back and forth between the two skeins, and the skein itself. So it just kind of faded them together, I guess is what you would call that. Anyway, really like it. It's really nice. It will probably be a gift to somebody that likes oranges and purples because that seems to be the main colors that are going on. So those are my that's what I've gotten done knitting wise. So I did complete some yarn dyeing last weekend, in preparation for doing some more gift giving knitting. Now, my intention was to dye up a couple of skeins of fingering weight yarn that I'm going to use for some shawls. Now, one of the people that I'm making this for, or actually both of them like yellow. They said that was their favorite color. One of them liked yellow and green, and the other one liked yellow and black. So I was hoping, with food coloring, keep that in mind, to dye up a skein of some tonal yellow base and then speckle green over one and black over the other. Well, with food coloring, speckling black is really, really hard. So I started with that one first to see if it would even turn out. And one of the things I also know about Wilton's black, is which the food coloring I was using, is that it tends to break, and it breaks green, especially on yellow. So that's the one I started with, because I figured if it breaks badly and it doesn't look black, then I can use it for the green one. And it broke. It does not look like black speckles in the least. So I have this really lovely tonal yellow going on. And I got this idea actually from another YouTube dyer of using the same color, but doing different tonalities and different shades of it as a variegated dyeing process, going into doing a variegated dyeing, but using basically the same color, but different shades and different tonalities of it. And so that's what I did, was I created this base using different types of food coloring. I used Wilton's icing in two different colorways, or two different food colorings. I used Wilton's drops, and then I used just generic Kroger food coloring yellow as well. And so I just used all these different types of food colorings, and it came out with this very tonal look. And then I created black sugar sprinkles using Wilton's black food coloring and sugar, and used that to do my speckling. But as you can see, it really did break quite a bit in terms of going towards the green, which I think will look lovely for my green speckled. But then that left me with, what do I do with for the other skein? So the other skein I just did with my tonal yellow base. It's very subtle in its color shifts, but there are definitely different shades of the yellow, almost bordering on orange in some places. So I'm not going to go with a different color on this. This will just be this variegated yellow, which I think will make a nice, lovely shawl that they will like anyway. Because who doesn't like a hand knit shawl? Especially if you're a woman that is in a cold office. So, or even if you're a guy in a cold office. I used to wear shawls all the time when I worked in an office. So those are my finished objects. And so now let's talk about things that are still in progress. So what do I want to start with? Oh, we'll start with the old stuff. Stuff that is the oldest out there. I am still working on my scrunchable scarf with my color mixing experiments in a rainbow, of course. And I am on my final color, and I am not too far away from being finished. If I know where my skein of yarn went to. Oh, it fell to the floor, of course. So, not too much further to go. And I will have this scarf done. So a reminder, if you don't know, I mixed these colors using food coloring, dyed up some mini skeins, and am knitting the Scrunchable Scarf by Susan McCone. Very simple one row stitch pattern that makes a nice sort of mistake rib scarf. This is an 80-20 blend of recycled yarn. It used to be a sweater, now it's a scarf in the colors that I chose. And so there's that's coming along, should be done soon. I know, I've been dragging my feet on it. It's not particularly exciting. It makes some really good mindless knitting while watching TV or streaming. Yeah. So next, of course, I'm still working on my sock in my Dyer Supplier 80-20 fingering weight yarn, and the pattern is the Sockmatician's Toe Ups by Nathan Taylor. I'm still on the first sock. I am still on the cuff, and I haven't been too interested in knitting on it, so it hasn't gotten a lot of attention. I have knit a couple rows, every once in a while, but not a lot of attention. Been knitting cowls, as you can see over here. Been knitting cowls, not socks. And okay, then my last work in progress is my lace shawl that I'm working on. This is a repeat shawl. I've done this shawl before. This is the Spring Thaw by Sherry McEwen. Again, this is a free pattern on Ravelry. And I really do enjoy knitting this one. It's a very simple pattern to memorize. You do have to pay a bit of attention, though, because you can, if you've set it down for a couple of days and you come back, you may have to remind yourself where you're at. But yeah, very lovely shawl, triangular in its basic format, that you can see it's sort of wing based. The yarn that I'm using is Cascade Heritage 150 in the colorway of Yolk. So it's a very bright yellow color. Again, sort of almost bordering on the orange, but it's definitely a yellow. It's a 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon sock base. It's kind of more of a heavier fingering weight. I would almost call it a sport weight and not a fingering weight, but it works up nicely. I cannot wait to block it to open up the design a little bit more. And I can't wait to get to the end of it, because the lace section at the end is really impressive. It's simple to do, but it looks so super great. So I can't wait to get that one done. But it's been sort of languishing a little bit because of the cowls. I guess this kind of takes me into that whole world of being a process knitter versus a project knitter. And process knitters tend to be the ones that they knit for simply the joy of knitting itself. They have no problems tinking back and fixing mistakes, or ripping out whole sections and going back and fixing mistakes. Whereas project knitters are more about, I want to get to the finished project. I knit for the end result. And so if there's a little mistake in my knitting that I missed, I'm going to call it a design enhancement and move forward. I'm a little of both at times. When I was starting out, I was all about the project. In fact, I would do one thing at a time. I only had one thing on the needles at a time. I would knit it, I would complete it, I would have it done. It would be great. Over the last couple of years, I have migrated into having multiple things on the needles. Knitting is simply, I knit for simply the process of knitting. I love having the finished projects and the product at the end that I can either give away or wear myself. But yeah, there's I find that shifts back and forth a little bit. And so I've been in a very product, having that project finished, that product in my hands at the end. I've been very much into having to have that need of accomplishment, while at the same time still having long-term projects that continue to go on. Yeah, so those are my works in progress. That's what's going on. No new acquisitions since last podcast, which is kind of sad. But, I have a lot of things there, and, I have bare yarn that I can dye. So when I need some new yarn, I can just go create it, which is a lot of fun for me. Casting on. So these two babies right here are going to turn into two different shawls. And I haven't decided which ones I'm going to do. I'm considering one or two out of these three. Either the Close to You by Justina Lorkowska, Confetti by Jennifer Tipton, or Easy Goes It by Finicky Creations. All of these are knit on the bias from a small cast on up to the finished edge being long, so they're on the bias, so they're not top down. I like those especially when using one single skeins. Sorry about that. I like those because when using single skeins, it's just easier to just have that be sort of going from one small point to kind of that wedge. So I'm going to have to decide which of those three I want to do. I'll probably cast on the newer ones that I haven't done, because I've done the Close to You a couple of times and I've never done either of the other two. So I'll probably go start with the other two, and if I don't like it after a few inches of that shawl, then I might switch from one of those to the Close to You shawl. I'm hoping not to have to go hunting for other projects, but you never know. Okay. Activities. What else has been going on? Well, let's see. I have been watching the election thing going on. Yeah, it's just been crazy. It'll be interesting to see how that all turns out. I know I have who I want to see move forward into the inauguration in January. And I'm not going to really talk about who that is, but I know I have my druthers, and I am actually hopeful for the new year. So that might give you a clue. What else has been going on? Hey, there's a new knitting blog out there, and I do love my knitting blogs, and I watch them a lot. But there's a new one out there by Franklin Habit. Now, many of you know who this guy is. I am vaguely aware of Franklin Habit, and I've never really watched his channel before. But then when he started doing this really short video vlog of just his musings, I found it extremely refreshing and really interesting. So go check it out. He has 3 episodes out. They're each little gems. They're about 15 to 20 minutes long. They're just absolutely wonderful. So yeah, do go check out his new vlog on his channel out at Franklin Habit. I'll have the link to it down in the notes below. Movies and TV. Basically just been watching some serials on TV. I've still been watching Schitt's Creek. I am up to the final season that I do need to rope my husband into being able to watch it so I can continue watching that. Been watching the new season of Mandalorian. I went through back and rewatched the first season and then started into the second one. I am a couple of episodes now behind, so don't tell me what happened. Although I know there's some crazy stuff going on with the baby, so it'll be interesting. I can't wait to watch. I need to get to watching that this weekend. And the other thing I've been watching has been The Worst Witch. Now, I am a sucker for these types of series. This one's on Netflix. It's a little British show. There was a movie back in the 80s called The Worst Witch, and Tim Curry made a cameo in it as the Grand High Wizard, whatever. It's very, very cute. This is so much better than I expected it to be. I started watching it on a lark, and now I'm like 3 seasons in, and I can't stop watching it. It's very, very, it's a lot of fun. It's interesting. It's actually become a bit dramatic. If you want to, in sort of some of the interplay and some very deep things that are going on. So a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed watching that. So that's on Netflix if you're interested. I recommend it. It's light, it's entertaining, and it's a lot of fun for everyone. Anyone could watch this. So that takes us up to a little bit of class time. So I'm going to take just a moment here and we'll switch over to class time, and we'll pick up with talking about synthetic yarns. We've talked about protein-based yarns. We've talked about cellulose-based yarns or plant-based fibers. We have talked about cellulosic fibers, and that kind of segues us into synthetic fibers. Synthetic fibers are very similar to cellulosic fibers, because cellulosic fibers takes the plant matter, liquefies it, and then extrudes it out. Synthetic fibers takes man-made products like oils and things like that and turns it into fiber. So we'll look at that a little bit more closely in a moment. All right. So we are back to talk about synthetic fibers or man-made fibers. So synthetic fibers are fibers derived from a chemical synthesis, and they are meant to be just like wool, angora, cotton, cashmere, other natural fibers. These sort of came out of when people were experimenting to try and create the man-made silk, and they created that man-made silk, then the rayon. They continued experimenting, and so that was in the early 20th century, around 1924-ish. So in about 10 years later, in 1935, DuPont came out with a successful synthetic fiber that was not based on plant material. What they did was they combined different elements like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, basically coal, air, and water. And they formed a polymer that was then melted down, extruded through spinnerets, cooled, and conditioned a bit so it created a firm, stretchy fiber that we today call nylon. They continued experimenting, and later on in the 50s, they came out with polyester, acrylic, spandex. And even today, they continue to experiment with synthetic fibers and creating what we call microfiber. which are very durable, very soft, very stretchy, very shiny. So it tends to be like those. So the really big positives are it's lustrous. It has a nice shine to it. It's soft. It's very strong. It's resilient, easy to wash so it won't shrink and felt. It's inexpensive to produce, and it's resistant to pests like moths and mildew, which those things are things that attack your protein and your plant-based fibers. Now, on the flip side of that is that they are not good at absorbing water, and so they don't breathe well. So it's very easy to feel clammy when wearing an acrylic sweater. They're more likely to conduct static electricity because they don't hold water inside in them. Because they have static electricity, they also attract dust and dirt, and so therefore they need to be washed more often, which means they're also prone to pilling because of they create artificially short fibers that poke out because they don't have a natural crimp to them, and they don't have any natural scales on them to keep them in line. And so little fibers will poke out and they'll rub and then they'll turn into these little balls, and that's your pilling business. And here's the big thing. When they are subjected to a high heat, they tend to melt just like a plastic, and many of them will also give off a very acrid and dangerous chemical smell and chemical fumes that you wouldn't want to be around. So that is the downside of synthetic fibers. So nylon, this is the first big one that, and we still use this. It's really a generic term for a range of fibers that are run into a family called polyamides or polyamides. Started off being used for things like toothbrushes and stockings back during World War II. Because silk was hard to come by, because silk was often produced in Japan and we were at war with Japan. And so silk was a highly priced commodity used by the military for things like parachutes. So nylon was great because that helped in other things like stockings, toothbrushes, other things that would often have been used for something else. Characteristics are strong, even when wet or dry. It's stretchy, has a low moisture uptake, so it's not going to mildew, but it doesn't wick fibers away very well. Now, so because of that, it's often added to natural fibers to add strength. So, for example, we often see sock yarn blended with a low percentage of nylon. So you'll have like a 75% merino wool with 25% nylon. It gives it that extra strength and a little bit of extra stretch. Now later on in the 50s, we have polyester. Polyester is also made from a polymer of polypropylene and polyethylene. It's a little bit different from your nylon. It's lightweight and strong, has good dimensional stability, so it doesn't stretch out of shape very well or very easily. It's softer and warmer than nylon, although it does tend to pill, is less absorbent, and susceptible to heat damage. So you're not going to iron these very often. And then we have acrylic, which many of us in the crafting world are very familiar with acrylic yarn. It's been in commercial production since the 50s, was born out of the wartime need for synthetic rubbers. but then they found it has, good elasticity, it's lightweight, abrasion resistant. It, however, does have a wicking nature to it, in that it will wick moisture away and is fast drying. But it also is susceptible to heat damage. And so there's your basic synthetic fibers that we most often use in our work with yarn. So it's been very interesting to hear and think about these different fibers. So kind of brings us to the end of our session this week. I hope you've enjoyed this short lesson on synthetic fibers, and also seeing the things that I've been doing in the dye pot and the things that I've been doing in my knitting world. Be sure and check out the other videos on my channel. I have both videos about my yarn dyeing and my yarn dyeing experiments, as well as other podcasts that I have done in the past. So feel free to check those out. Give me a shout out in the comments. Let me know what you're thinking about the information on this channel, questions you might have. What are your experiences with yarn dyeing, with knitting? What are some of your favorite one skein shawl patterns that you like to knit? Because I could really use some additional shawl patterns. So yeah, give me a shout out in the comments. You can find me on social media as well. I am on Facebook. I have a Facebook page called GreatScott Knitting, which is at facebook.com/GreatScott Knitting. I'm on Instagram as GreatScott Knitting, and I'm on Ravelry as GreatScott KCMO. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Enjoy your knitting.